The rain had been falling for hours over the forgotten park of Silver Creek. When Jack Carter, a war veteran, passed by with his loyal dog Rex, they stopped, because under the old slide, a little girl with one leg sat trembling, soaked to the bone, clutching her stomach. Her voice was barely a whisper. "It hurts. Please don't take me home." What Jack and Rex discovered that night would uncover a truth buried deep beneath pain and silence. If you believe no child should suffer alone, stay with us. Subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter, and may your day be filled with light and hope. The late afternoon rain had not stopped for hours, drumming steadily against rooftops and empty streets across the quiet town of Silver Creek. The wind carried the scent of wet pine and the faint hum of thunder rolling over the distant hills. Jack Carter, a 42-year-old veteran, drove his old pickup down the deserted road that bordered the town's abandoned park. The headlights cut through the gray curtain of rain, illuminating broken benches and overgrown weeds. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening drive home after helping an elderly couple fix a generator on the far side of town. But as he slowed near the rusted gates of the old park, something in the way Rex shifted beside him made him look twice. Rex was a 6-year-old German shepherd, lean and muscular, his coat dark sable with lighter markings along his chest and legs. Even after retirement from service, the dog carried himself with the alert grace of a soldier who never truly left the field. When he tensed, Jack felt it too. The dog's ears shot forward, his nose pressed to the glass, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Jack's hand left the steering wheel, resting gently on Rex's neck, an old reflex born from years of trust. "Easy, boy," he murmured, but Rex didn't ease. His gaze was locked on the park ahead, on something hidden within the shadows and rain. Jack slowed the truck to a stop near the cracked walkway. The park had once been a cheerful place. He remembered it faintly from years ago, laughter echoing through the trees before the town lost its heart and the paint on the playground peeled away. Now, it looked like a graveyard of forgotten childhoods, the colors long stripped by time. Rex whined, pawing at the door. Jack opened it, stepping into the rain that instantly soaked through his sleeves. The cold bit at his skin as he clicked on his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the desolate space. At first, there was nothing but rain and silence. Then, Rex barked sharply and ran ahead, water splashing under his paws. Jack followed quickly, the beam of light darting across a swing still swaying in the wind. And there, under the rusted slide, he saw her. A small figure, barely visible, hunched over and trembling. Jack's heart tightened before his mind caught up. She was so still that for a moment he thought she might already be gone. He approached slowly, the light revealing a little girl no older than 5, her hair plastered to her face, her tiny hands clutching her stomach. As he drew closer, the flashlight caught on the metal of something unnatural. It took him a second to understand. Her left leg ended mid-thigh, replaced by a thin prosthetic limb of brushed steel, rainwater dripping down its surface. The other leg, bare and pale, was curled tightly against her body. Nearby, half buried in mud, lay a small crutch, the only thing that looked newer than the playground itself. Jack crouched low, careful not to startle her. "Hey, it's all right," he said softly, voice low beneath the rain. "You're safe now." She flinched at the sound, her shoulders shaking. Then, barely audible, came the words that froze him where he knelt. "It hurts. Please don't take me home." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain and Rex's quiet breathing. Jack could feel the weight of those words in his chest, like a memory he didn't want to relive. He recognized the tone, fear mixed with exhaustion, the same kind he'd heard from civilians caught in crossfire years ago. The girl's lips were pale, her skin cold to the touch. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her small frame. Rex lowered himself beside her, pressing his muzzle gently against her arm. She looked at him weakly, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the dog's wet fur. Something in that tiny gesture broke the distance between them. Jack lifted her carefully into his arms, surprised at how light she was, her body limp but tense in pain. Rex stayed close as they made their way back to the truck, the rain turning the ground slick beneath their boots. Every breath she took seemed shallow, each movement a silent struggle. Jack opened the passenger door and laid her across the back seat, making sure the jacket stayed wrapped around her. Rex jumped in beside her, curling protectively along her side, the warmth of his body keeping her from shivering too much. When Jack looked down, he saw her hand gripping a handful of Rex's fur as if afraid he might vanish. He climbed into the driver's seat, his heart pounding with a strange mixture of urgency and calm. As he started the engine, a sharp scent hit him, the chemical tang of paint thinner, faint but unmistakable. He turned slightly, catching sight of her sweatshirt smeared with pale streaks of something oily, the color of old metal. That smell dragged him backward in time to a night he'd tried hard to forget, the explosion at the Bright Line paint factory, the fire, the men he'd pulled out of the rubble. He remembered that same smell clinging to his clothes afterward, even after days of washing. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as the truck rolled forward through the rain. Jack's thoughts moved just as fast, questions piling one atop another. Who was she? Why was she here? What kind of home would make a child beg not to be taken back? The road blurred under the headlights as he gripped the wheel tighter, pushing the truck faster toward the town's small hospital. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Rex's head rested beside the girl's, his eyes fixed on her as though guarding something fragile. As they drove, the storm seemed to soften, the rain turning into a mist that shimmered under the streetlights. The girl's breathing grew quieter, her eyelids heavy. Jack's jacket had slipped halfway off her shoulders, and he reached back at a stoplight to adjust it, the motion automatic, protective. Her small hand remained tangled in Rex's fur. The dog didn't move, only blinked once, slow and watchful. Jack felt the familiar ache of a soldier's helplessness, the kind that comes not from battle, but from seeing someone too small to fight their own war. By the time they reached the hospital on Cedar Street, the world was quiet except for the sound of tires over wet pavement. Jack parked near the entrance, grabbed the umbrella from the floor, and stepped into the rain once more. He carried the girl inside, Rex pacing beside him. The bright light of the lobby seemed too harsh after the storm's gray calm. Nurses turned at once, their eyes widening at the sight of the one-legged child limp in his arms. Jack didn't explain much. He didn't have to. Words would come later. For now, there was only the silent urgency of a man who had seen too much suffering to hesitate. Outside, as the automatic doors closed behind them, the rain continued to fall over Silver Creek, steady and unrelenting. The truck's headlights flickered across the wet parking lot before fading into the distance. Rex gave one last look toward the back seat where the girl had been, then followed Jack into the sterile brightness of the hospital. In the echo of that storm, a quiet beginning had been written, one born not from fate, but from compassion in the most ordinary of moments. The fluorescent lights of Silver Creek Hospital hummed softly against the quiet of the early morning. Rain still streaked down the wide windows of the emergency wing, a reminder of the storm that had carried Jack and the little girl here only hours earlier. The air inside smelled faintly of antiseptic and warm linen, a strange contrast to the damp chill that clung to Jack's jacket. He sat in a metal chair near the corner of the small exam room, elbows resting on his knees, eyes never straying far from the hospital bed. Rex lay on the floor beside him, head between his paws, tail motionless but eyes alert. The child, now under the pale white sheets, seemed impossibly small against the sterile light. The door opened with a soft click, and Dr. Margaret Cole stepped in, adjusting her glasses as she glanced at the medical chart. She was a woman in her late 50s, her posture straight, movements steady, the kind of doctor who carried decades of quiet compassion behind tired eyes. Lines of experience framed her face, but her tone was warm, almost motherly when she looked up at Jack. "She's stable," she said, voice calm yet heavy with something unsaid. Jack rose halfway from his seat. "Is she going to be all right?" he asked. Dr. Cole hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the sleeping child before she spoke again. "She has deep bruising around her abdomen and signs of internal inflammation. And there's more. Chemical traces in her blood work that suggest mild toxicity, likely from prolonged exposure to industrial solvents." Jack frowned, the words sinking in slowly. His mind immediately went to the oily smell that had clung to the girl's clothes, that same scent from Bright Line. Dr. Cole continued, her tone careful. "Whatever environment she's been in isn't safe for a child. We'll need to keep her for observation, but she's malnourished too. This isn't new. Rex stirred at her words, lifting his head, ears twitching toward the bed. The dog sniffed the air, then gave a low whine, as if confirming what Jack already feared. He reached down to rub the dog's neck gently, his eyes never leaving the girl. You said chemical exposure, he murmured. What kind? Dr. Cole sighed. It's too early to tell, but the compounds are consistent with paint thinners or solvents, something you'd find in a factory or workshop. The child began to stir then, her fingers clutching at the bedsheet. Her face, pale and fragile, twisted slightly in discomfort before her eyes fluttered open. She looked disoriented, blinking against the light, and when she saw Jack, her body tensed as though bracing for something she couldn't name. Jack softened his voice. You're safe here, he said, though even as he spoke, he knew safety was a fragile promise. She studied him for a long moment, her breathing uneven. What's your name? He asked quietly. Her lips parted, a whisper barely audible. Emily. The name trembled out of her like a secret she wasn't supposed to share. Jack nodded slowly, his expression softening. That's a beautiful name, Emily. Dr. Cole approached the bed gently, checking the IV line. Emily's gaze darted toward her, wary but silent. When the doctor lifted the edge of her sleeve to examine bruises on her arm, the child flinched. Jack took a half-step forward, but stopped when Dr. Cole gave a small nod. Everything was fine. Then Emily spoke again, voice low and cracked. My dad said it's because I'm bad, and I shouldn't tell anyone. The words came out in a rush, as if saying them was both a confession and a crime. Jack's chest tightened. The room went still. Dr. Cole drew in a slow breath and lowered the sleeve back over the girl's arm. You're not bad, she said softly, almost to herself. But Emily had already turned her face toward the wall, eyes glassy, shutting herself away from the world again. Rex shifted closer to the bed, pressing his muzzle gently against the edge of the blanket. Emily hesitated, then reached out weakly, her fingers brushing against his fur. The dog didn't move, simply let her hold on. Jack watched the small exchange with a quiet ache. He'd seen soldiers hold on to dogs the same way in the aftermath of battle, like anchors keeping them tethered to life. The faint smell of chemicals still lingered in the room, sharp enough that even Jack could taste it. Rex's ears flicked, nose twitching, and he gave another low growl. He smells it too, Jack muttered, half to himself. Dr. Cole nodded, making a quick note on the chart. If her clothes are still here, we'll send them for testing. As the morning stretched into early light, Jack stepped outside the room for a moment, the weight of everything pressing against his chest. He leaned against the cold wall near the nurse's station, eyes closed, thinking of the bright line explosion again. The smoke, the coughing workers, the way the company had called it an accident and moved on. He exhaled sharply, then pulled out his phone. There was only one person he trusted to help him make sense of what he was starting to uncover. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. Jack? It's early, the woman said. It's important, he replied. There's a kid, 5 years old, injuries, chemical exposure, says her dad told her not to talk. There was silence, then a sigh. Send me the address. I'm on my way. Clara Jennings arrived an hour later, her car tires splashing through shallow puddles outside the hospital. She was 39, sharp-minded, steady-voiced, a social worker who had seen enough broken families to recognize danger before the paperwork ever confirmed it. Her dark blonde hair was tied back, her expression composed but resolute. When she entered the room, Emily was sitting upright now, propped by pillows, eyes red from fatigue. Jack introduced them briefly, and Clara crouched to the girl's level, her tone gentle but direct. Hi, Emily. My name's Clara. I help kids feel safe when things around them don't. Emily didn't reply, only looked from her to Jack, then back again. Clara turned to Jack quietly. You said she was found outside. He nodded. Old park near my place. She said she didn't want to go home. Clara's gaze darkened with understanding. Did you notice anything on her clothes? Paint stains, residue? Jack hesitated, then nodded. It smelled like paint thinner, the same as the Bright Line site. Clara's jaw tightened. That company again, she said under her breath. I've had complaints from workers before. Breathing problems, rashes, missing safety protocols. Nothing stuck. They're protected. She straightened, adjusting her coat. If her father works there, we need to find out fast. Dr. Cole entered again, handing Clara a copy of the preliminary report. Her lungs show traces consistent with solvent exposure, she explained. I'd advise immediate intervention. Clara's eyes softened as she looked back at Emily. We'll make sure she doesn't go back to that house until we know the truth. When the hospital quieted again, Jack stood by the doorway, watching Emily as she drifted between wakefulness and sleep. The soft hum of machines filled the silence. He knew too well what fear could do to a child, how it made them small, even in rooms that were meant to protect them. He thought of the promise he'd once made to himself when he returned from war, never to look away when someone needed help. He moved closer, resting a hand on the bed rail. You're safe now, he said, barely above a whisper. Her eyes opened, unfocused, but she seemed to hear him. As the rain finally stopped outside, the clouds began to lift, letting in a faint gray light through the blinds. Rex sat quietly beside the bed, tail curled around his paws, eyes fixed on the little girl as though keeping watch. Jack took a slow breath, the exhaustion settling in his bones but not his resolve. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be simple. The scent of that paint still lingered in his mind like a warning. Before he turned to leave, Emily's voice broke the stillness once more, fragile but sure. Will you come back? Jack gave a faint nod. You won't have to go back to the place that hurts you, he said gently. I promise. The following afternoon, Silver Creek lay under a low gray sky, the kind that seemed to press down on every rooftop, smothering the color out of the town. Jack Carter parked his truck near the edge of the industrial district, where the air already carried the faint sting of solvents and rust. The neighborhood around him was quiet, rows of small houses hunched together like tired soldiers after a long fight. Each yard was fenced by chain link and dotted with forgotten tools, the kind of place where decay blended seamlessly into routine. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, ears pricked, eyes scanning the rows of houses. Jack glanced down at the address scribbled on his notepad. 216 Briar Lane, Emily Carter's home. They approached on foot, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. The Carter house sat at the end of the street, its siding stained and warped, a pale green dulled by years of chemical dust from the nearby factories. A half-finished paint job streaked across one side, as if someone had given up halfway through. The porch light was off, though the sun hadn't yet set. When Jack stepped closer, Rex stiffened, nose twitching. The smell hit almost immediately, sharp and chemical, the kind of odor that burned faintly at the back of the throat. Jack paused, taking it in. Paint thinner, he muttered. Too much of it. Rex growled low, pressing closer to his leg. Jack knocked once, then again. After a long pause, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 40s. Owen Carter was tall but gaunt, his hands stained with flecks of dried paint, a smudge of gray across his jaw where stubble met grime. His eyes, a muted hazel, carried the dull look of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks, or who no longer cared to. He wore a faded work shirt and jeans splattered with white streaks. Officer Carter, right? He asked, his tone flat, almost mechanical. Heard you brought my kid to the hospital. Jack didn't correct him on the title. There were bigger matters at hand. That's right. We need to talk about her condition. Owen stepped aside reluctantly, muttering something under his breath. Inside, the house was worse. The walls were lined with open paint cans, rollers, and rags thrown haphazardly across the floor. The smell of solvent hung thick in the air, nearly suffocating. A small dining table was buried under scattered tools and unopened mail. Jack scanned the room, his brow furrowing as he noticed a small toy half buried beneath a tarp. Emily's, no doubt. Owen caught the look and shrugged. She likes to play where I work, he said casually. Girl's curious, probably just caught a bug or something. Doctors like to exaggerate. His indifference grated against every instinct Jack had. She has chemical poisoning, Jack said quietly. That's not a stomach bug. Owen gave a small laugh that didn't reach his eyes. I've worked around paint for 20 years, never hurt me. Moved toward the kitchen, brushing off the comment like it was nothing. Rex's gaze followed him, tail rigid, nose twitching. The dog gave a quiet rumble deep in his chest. Jack noticed it, that telltale warning, and let him be. Rex never reacted without reason. When Owen disappeared into the other room, Jack crouched near the hallway, his flashlight sweeping the floor. The chemical residue on the tiles gleamed faintly, mixed with dust and footprints, tiny ones, smaller than a man's boot. Rex moved ahead, sniffing the air with intensity, head low, tail straight. He led Jack down the narrow corridor toward a small bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was half open, the faded pink paint peeling at the corners. It was unmistakably a child's room, though it carried none of the warmth such places should. The bed was unmade, sheets speckled with faint stains. Drawings, once colorful, now hung curled and yellowed on the wall. Rex hesitated for a moment, then lowered his head under the bed frame. A second later, he gave a sharp bark and backed up slightly, hackles raised. Jack knelt beside him and shone the light underneath. What he saw tightened every muscle in his body. Half a dozen small metal cans, their sides dented and labels faded with the familiar Brightline insignia. Each one leaked a thin sheen of oily residue onto the floorboards. Beside them, a rag, stiff and darkened, reeked of solvent. Scattered in the dust were fingerprints, small and uneven, the smudged marks of a child's hand. Jack's stomach turned. He used the edge of his sleeve to pull one can out, reading the corroded text. Solvent Mix 74B. He remembered it from the Brightline fire reports, an industrial-grade compound not meant for residential use. Rex pawed the floor, whining softly as if disturbed by the scent itself. When Jack stood, Owen had returned, holding a coffee mug that still bore flecks of dried paint around the rim. "You shouldn't be in there," he said sharply. Jack ignored him, his tone controlled but firm. "You're storing toxic material where your daughter sleeps. Do you even realize the danger?" Owen scoffed, setting the mug down on a cluttered dresser. "It's just paint, for God's sake. She likes to help. Keeps her busy." Jack's voice dropped lower. "She's 5 years old." For a moment, Owen's expression faltered, the mask slipping, but then it hardened again. "You people always think you know better," he muttered. "You don't live here." Outside, a car engine rumbled to a stop. Clara Jennings stepped out, adjusting her coat against the wind. Her expression was grim as she entered, flashing her badge lightly at Owen before glancing at Jack. "You were right," she said quietly. "The neighbors confirmed complaints about the smell. And there's more." She opened her notebook, flipping to a page. One woman, Mrs. Ruth Bellamy, 2 doors down, said she used to see Emily's mother here almost daily until about a year ago. Then she vanished. Owen froze at that, though his eyes darted quickly to the side. Clara continued. "Melissa Carter worked at Brightline, filed a safety complaint against them for illegal dumping. A week later, she disappeared. The company called it a family relocation. No one's heard from her since." The silence that followed was heavy enough to fill the entire room. Jack looked back at the cans under the bed, the oily smears on the floorboards, the thin blanket of dust that seemed to hold a story no one had wanted to read. Everything aligned too neatly, the chemicals, the missing mother, the company's shadow, stretching quietly across this small house. He felt the pieces locking together like gears in an old machine finally starting to move. Owen shifted uncomfortably, crossing his arms. "Melissa left," he said defensively. "Couldn't handle the work, the kid, all of it. That's what she told me." Clara closed her notebook slowly. "Or maybe she tried to protect her daughter and someone made sure she couldn't." Jack stood quietly by the window, his reflection faint in the glass. Beyond it, the smokestacks of the old Brightline plant rose in the distance, dark against the dimming sky. He thought of Emily's words at the hospital, the fear in her eyes when she said her father told her not to talk. This wasn't just neglect. It was a chain of silence forged by people who valued profit over lives. Rex pressed against his leg, a steady presence in the growing unease. "She's not safe here," Jack said finally. "And this," he gestured toward the leaking cans, "this isn't just one man's mistake. It's something bigger." Clara nodded, her voice low but certain. "Then we're looking at more than a broken home. We're looking at a cover-up." The room seemed smaller now, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jack glanced back toward the hallway, where the scent of paint was strongest. The faint outline of a small handprint still marked the wall just outside the door, half smudged but undeniable. He reached out, his palm hovering near it, feeling the echo of a child's world poisoned by the carelessness of adults. Behind him, Rex let out a low, steady whine, the kind he made when he sensed something wrong. Jack turned toward the door, his voice calm but edged with resolve. "We'll find out what really happened here," he said. "For her, and for the ones who couldn't speak." The night crept slowly over Silver Creek, swallowing the last trace of daylight into a haze of gray and smoke. Jack Carter sat at his kitchen table, an open folder of photographs and handwritten notes spread before him. The faint buzz of the ceiling light filled the silence, blending with the rhythmic ticking of the old clock by the door. Outside, Rex lay on the porch, his amber eyes reflecting the glow from inside, his ears twitching at every passing sound. Jack had seen horrors on the battlefield, but the weight of what he now held in his hands, a child poisoned in her own home, a missing mother, and a factory that reeked of lies, felt heavier than any war. Clara Jennings arrived just before midnight, the exhaustion in her face illuminated by the porch light. She carried a worn briefcase tucked under one arm, her hair damp from the mist that hung in the air. "I found something," she said quietly, stepping inside. The file she placed on the table bore the name Melissa Carter. Inside were scanned documents, letters, and a faded photo of a woman in her 30s with auburn hair, tired but kind eyes, and a small girl sitting on her lap. Emily, no more than 2 at the time. "She's alive," Clara said. After she filed a report accusing Brightline of illegal dumping, she started getting threats. Anonymous calls, strange cars parked outside. A week later, she left town. The company claimed she relocated voluntarily, but the paper trail doesn't match. Jack stared at the photo for a long moment, his jaw tightening. "They silenced her," he muttered, "and the girl paid the price." The next morning came heavy and overcast, the kind of gray that promised rain but delivered only a slow, biting wind. Jack parked his truck near the edge of the old Brightline complex, a massive structure long abandoned, its metal siding streaked with rust, the faded logo still clinging to the front gate. The plant had been closed for years, but its skeleton remained, a monument to negligence. Rex jumped down from the truck bed, landing lightly despite the weight of his frame, tail low, posture alert. Jack adjusted the flashlight in his hand, his voice quiet. "Stay close, partner." The gate groaned as it opened, the hinges protesting against years of stillness. Inside, the smell hit him immediately, faint but familiar, the same bitter chemical tang that had lingered on Emily's clothes. They moved through the main corridor, their footsteps echoing off the hollow concrete. The air was thick, still carrying the ghost of solvents long evaporated. Rusted machinery stood like forgotten giants in the half-darkness. Rex sniffed the ground, following a trail that only he could sense. His nails clicked softly against the floor until he stopped near a corner of the storage hall. There, among scattered debris and broken pallets, was something small, a child's footprint pressed faintly into the dust. Jack crouched beside it, tracing the outline with his finger. It was no bigger than Emily's hand. His heart sank as he followed Rex's gaze to the wall nearby, where a small pink lunchbox rested, its plastic cracked but still recognizable, a faded cartoon decal on its lid. Jack opened the lunchbox carefully. Inside lay the remnants of a sandwich, now hardened, and a tiny folded napkin with faint writing on it. "Be good, sweetheart. Mommy loves you." The ink had blurred, but the words were still legible. Jack exhaled, the sound barely audible. "She was here," he whispered. Rex gave a quiet whine, his tail brushing against the floor. As Jack stood, his flashlight swept across the room and caught a row of rusted canisters, each marked with the same triangular warning label he'd seen in Owen Carter's house. The text read, "Solvent Mix 74B," the same compound Dr. Cole had mentioned. Some were sealed, others leaked a slow, dark ooze that pooled beneath them in shimmering puddles. He pulled his phone from his pocket, switching it to video mode, the red light blinking steadily in the dim space. "Brightline warehouse," he said quietly into the microphone. "Illegal chemical storage confirmed. Possible contamination evidence. Direct link to residential exposure." His boots splashed lightly in the puddle as he moved closer for a clearer shot. Rex sniffed the air and began to cough, a sharp, choking sound that froze Jack in place. He dropped to one knee, pulling the dog toward him. Rex's breathing came uneven, his nose wet with residue. "Easy, boy," Jack said, wrapping his arm around him. The acrid smell was stronger now, the air dense with invisible toxins. He grabbed his scarf, tying it around his mouth, and lifted Rex in his arms. The dog's eyes were still alert but watery, his body trembling faintly. Jack carried him outside into the cold air, setting him down gently beside the truck. Rex coughed once more, then steadied himself, pressing his muzzle against Jack's hand as if apologizing for being weak. "You're all right," Jack murmured, stroking his fur. The rain had started again, light and steady, washing away the dust on the concrete. Jack leaned against the truck, his breath visible in the chill. "They buried this," he said to no one in particular. "They buried everything." His camera continued recording, its small lens capturing the leaking barrels behind him as proof of the nightmare that had poisoned more than just air and water. It had poisoned lives. Later that evening, Clara called him from her office, her voice taut with emotion. "Jack, I reached her. Melissa." He straightened in his chair, fatigue momentarily forgotten. "Where is she?" "Montana," Clara replied. "She's been living under her maiden name. I told her about Emily." There was a pause, broken only by the soft crackle of the phone line. "She cried for 10 minutes before she could even speak," Clara said quietly. "She thought her daughter was dead," Brightline told. "Her Owen took the child and left after she abandoned them. She's been writing letters for years, but they all came back unopened." Jack swallowed hard, staring out the window at the rain-slicked street. "She wants to see her?" "She said," Clara's voice faltered, "please, let me see her, just once." Jack sat in silence, the words settling heavily in the air. He glanced at Rex lying near the door, resting but watchful. The dog lifted his head, sensing the change in his tone, his tail giving a slow thump. Jack thought of Emily, the way she had clung to Rex's fur, the trembling in her voice when she begged not to be taken home. Somewhere between her pain and her mother's exile lay the truth that had been buried under layers of corporate deceit and human cruelty. "We'll bring her back," he said softly. Clara's voice on the other end wavered but held steady. "I'll make the arrangements, but Jack, be careful. People who silence others once won't hesitate to do it again." When the call ended, the house was quiet except for the sound of rain against the window pane. Jack stood, walking to the mantel where a faded photograph of his own unit from the war sat in a dusty frame. He had lost friends to explosions, to chaos, to silence. But the silence here was worse. It was deliberate, crafted by men who hid their crimes behind paperwork and profit. He turned back toward Rex, who had finally dozed off, his breathing shallow but calm. The faint smell of chemicals still clung to his fur, a reminder of the price of truth. Jack picked up his jacket, sliding the phone into the pocket. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "tomorrow we start making noise." Outside, the storm deepened, wind howling across the empty streets of Silver Creek. The Brightline warehouse stood silent once more, its toxic heart beating beneath the rain. Inside its dark walls, puddles reflected the flicker of distant lightning, revealing for a moment the words painted years ago near the entrance. Brightline Industries, building a safer future. The irony bled into the shadows as the night swallowed the last trace of light, leaving behind only the echo of a promise, one man's vow to uncover what should never have been hidden. The sun rose softly over Silver Creek that spring morning, washing the hills and rooftops in pale gold after months of gray. The town, once buried under the weight of secrecy, seemed to breathe again. Newspapers carried the name Brightline Industries across their front pages in bold black ink. Beneath the headline were words no one thought they would ever read: executives charged in chemical negligence case. The investigation had reached its end, and justice, though slow and scarred, had finally found its voice. Jack Carter stood at the edge of Main Street, coffee in hand, watching a truck haul away the last of Brightline's storage drums from the industrial district. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen something broken begin, at last, to mend. It had taken months of testimony, reports, and sleepless nights. Clara Jennings had led the hearings with unshakable precision, her calm composure cutting through the layers of corporate defense. Melissa Carter had stood in court, voice trembling yet clear, recounting the years of fear she had endured, the threats, the exile, the lies that stole her family. Jack's footage from the warehouse had sealed the case. The canisters, the leaked solvent, and Rex's near poisoning had been undeniable proof. In the final verdict, Brightline's top officials were dismissed, their licenses revoked. The plant was ordered permanently closed, its property converted into a rehabilitation fund for affected families. It was more than punishment, it was acknowledgement. Owen Carter's trial came soon after. Jack had not attended the first day, unwilling to hear the man's excuses. But Clara insisted he come for the sentencing. Inside the courthouse, Owen looked smaller than Jack remembered, his arrogance drained away, hands trembling as the judge read the charges: child endangerment, neglect, and obstruction of an investigation. His eyes flickered toward Melissa, who sat quietly behind the prosecution table, her hands clasped tightly together. When the sentence was handed down, 5 years in state custody with mandatory counseling, he simply nodded, his voice thin. I thought I was protecting her. But no one replied. Truth had already spoken louder than any apology could. When the gavel fell, Melissa wept silently into her palms. Clara placed a steady hand on her shoulder, and Jack, standing by the door, met her gaze across the room. It was the same look he had seen in war zones after evacuations, the look of someone who had lost everything, yet somehow survived. Outside the courthouse, the air was clear, the first real sunlight breaking through. Melissa approached him quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. You found her before it was too late, she said. Jack shook his head. Rex did. At the mention of his name, the dog gave a short bark, as if understanding his share in the moment. Weeks passed and Silver Creek began to heal. The Brightline warehouse, once a symbol of corruption, was fenced off and sealed by the county. Signs warned of contamination, but wildflowers had begun to grow between the cracks in the pavement, small bursts of color reclaiming the forgotten ground. Jack visited the hospital often during Rex's recovery. The dog had inhaled more toxins than anyone realized, and for days he lay weak, breathing shallowly under the watch of the town's veterinarian, Dr. Hayes, an older man with gentle hands and the patience of a priest. He's strong, Hayes had said one evening as Jack sat nearby. Sometimes loyalty pulls a creature through where medicine can't. By early summer, Rex was back on his feet, though a faint cough lingered when he ran too hard. Jack brought him along one afternoon to the community church on Willow Road, where Melissa and Emily had begun to rebuild their lives. The yard behind the church was quiet, filled with the scent of cut grass and blooming dogwoods. Emily sat cross-legged near the steps, a box of crayons beside her, her prosthetic leg gleaming faintly in the sun. She was drawing something with the concentration only children possess, her tongue poking slightly between her lips. Rex lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed in peace. Jack stood a few yards away, watching. Melissa was inside the small community hall, volunteering with other parishioners, her laughter soft but genuine. For a man who had seen too much grief, it was a rare kind of beauty, to see light return to a place that had known only shadows. Emily looked up and waved. Hi, Jack, she called, her voice bright, stronger than he remembered. He waved back, smiling. You keeping Rex out of trouble? She giggled, nodding. He's my best friend. Rex's tail thumped once in agreement. The sound of it, simple and rhythmic, was enough to make Jack's chest ache in the best way. One morning in late July, a small envelope arrived at Jack's doorstep. The handwriting on the front was uneven, letters tilting like little soldiers trying to stand straight. Inside was a folded piece of drawing paper. The crayons had smudged slightly in the summer heat, but the image was clear. A man and a dog standing under the rain, the man's coat draped over the dog's back, both facing a faint outline of a playground slide. Above them, written in crooked blue letters, were the words, "You were the first to stop." Jack stared at it for a long moment, feeling the air leave his lungs. He could still remember that night, the rain, the trembling child under the rusted slide, and the voice that had broken through the storm. Please don't take me home. He framed the drawing that afternoon and hung it on the wall of his small office above the police precinct. The edges of the paper curled slightly, but he didn't mind. Beneath it, he fixed a narrow brass plaque engraved with a single line. "You don't need medals to be a hero, only a heart that listens." The words felt true in a way few things ever did. Rex lay beside the desk, his fur brushing against Jack's boots, his eyes following every quiet movement. Outside, the town moved with a peace that had been hard-earned, the sound of construction echoing faintly from the hill where Brightline's remains were being dismantled. As evening settled, Jack sat back in his chair, the office bathed in soft orange light from the setting sun. He thought of the people who had carried this story: Clara's relentless courage, Melissa's quiet resilience, Emily's small but unbreakable spirit, and Rex's unspoken devotion. Each of them had faced the darkness in their own way and chosen to keep walking forward. Jack reached down to scratch Rex behind the ear, his voice barely a murmur. "We did all right, didn't we?" The dog gave a slow wag of his tail, his answer wordless but clear. The church bell rang in the distance, signaling the end of another day. Jack rose, turning off the light, leaving the office in the soft glow of dusk. The framed drawing caught the last streak of sunlight through the blinds, the colors glowing briefly before fading into shadow. Outside, the sky over Silver Creek burned with the hues of renewal: amber, rose, and pale gold. Somewhere beneath that sky, a little girl laughed and a dog barked back in joy. For Jack Carter, that sound was enough. In a world that often turns away from quiet pain, stories like this remind us that true compassion rarely shouts. It listens. Jack, Rex, and little Emily taught us that heroism isn't measured by medals or fame, but by the moments when someone chooses to stop, to care, and to act, even when no one is watching. It's the kind of love that expects nothing in return, the kind that heals what the world forgets. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in kindness. Leave a comment about what this story made you feel, and subscribe to stay with us for more tales of faith, hope, and unseen courage. May God bless you and every soul who still chooses compassion in a world that desperately needs it.